Thank you for downloading this Council on Foreign Relations video. CFR is an independent national membership organization and nonpartisan research center. For more information, please visit us online at cfr.org.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to preside at this afternoon's meeting. Although the title of the talk is World Energy Outlook 2008, this is not by any means the outlook for 2008. It's the 2008 outlook for the future, as opposed to the 2007 or the 2006 outlook. I'd like to ask you, if you haven't already done so, to please completely turn off, not just put on vibrate, but really turn off your cell phones, your BlackBerries, and all other wireless devices so that there's no interference with the sound system at the Council. This meeting is in fact on the record, so there are no need to talk about non-attribution rules. This means that participants are welcome to make use of the information that is received at this meeting, but you should neither identify the speakers nor that of any other participant, nor should you cite a council meeting as a source of the information. We're going to have a brief series of introductions by Dr. Fatih Birol, who's our guest this afternoon. He is, as you know, Chief Economist and Head of Economic Analysis at the International Energy Agency. The International Energy Agency has the privileged position of being the most authoritative source of information and analysis on the international energy sector. It's one of the prides of the Western world to have created this organization to create transparency in our markets and to goad the members of the organization to pursue policies that they might not otherwise in their common interest. And Fatih is in fact one of the most significant people on the senior managing staff of the IEA. He's responsible for providing regular briefings to the executive director and the governing board of the IEA on the economic impact of energy markets and industry developments. The WEO, the World Economic Outlook, is a series that is now recognized as the most authoritative source of forward-looking energy market analysis. Fatih's had a distinguished career not only at the International Energy Agency, but also before that at the OPEC Secretariat. He's received numerous honors and awards giving testimony to his analytical qualities and his analytical excellence. We're going to start the meeting with a 15-minute overview of the WEO that was just published a few weeks ago. I'm then going to engage in a dialogue with Fatih for another quarter of an hour, after which it will be open to audience interaction. So it's with great pleasure that I again welcome, now your fourth time, Fatih, at the Council, Fatih Birol.
So good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is again a great pleasure to come back to this very distinguished institution, and it's a great pleasure for me that I will make a brief presentation at a meeting that is presided by Ed Morse, from whom throughout my career learned a lot. I would like to talk with you a few findings of the World Energy Outlook, both on the general energy picture, how we see the energy picture, and then a few words on the oil markets, how it will develop in the future, we think, and finally a bit on the climate change issue. But before perhaps, before looking at the long term, just I would like to offer a couple of thoughts on the impact of financial crisis on the energy and the climate change. As Ed mentioned, we released this book on 12th of November. Since 3 weeks, we are on the way, and I am talking with governments, ministers, with the industry, and so on. And based on these discussions and the things that I read, I hear, I have three major worries how this current financial crisis can affect the energy sector and the climate change debate. The first one is there are, especially in the year 2009, I would say, there may be many postponements, delays, and cancellation of the projects, especially on the upstream projects, the independent companies, some bigger companies, some Middle East companies, national oil companies. And this postponement or the delays of these projects may well create a problem when the economy rebounds, when the demand picks up. We may well see some difficulties in the markets in a few years of time because of the postponement and cancellation or delay of these projects. This is the very first one. The second one is last year, especially in many IEA countries, OECD countries, our own governments, there was a lot of interest in putting new policies in place, more energy efficiency, more renewables, and other alternative technologies on the demand side and the supply side. There was a lot of interest, especially with the driven by the high oil prices. But I see that with the prices getting lower and the governments more and more preoccupied with the financial crisis, those preoccupations of the governments, putting new policies in place, energy efficiency, renewables, and the others, are now not anymore, in many cases, in the agenda. But it's a pity that because we thought that those policies would help both energy security and the climate change. Thirdly, the climate change was in many countries in Europe and elsewhere on the top of the agenda till last 6 months or 1 year. And everybody thought that the governments are taking climate change, putting it on the top of the agenda. But even in Europe, with the growing financial concerns, governments are not necessarily looking at the climate change from the same perspective. And this is especially risky when we are approaching the Copenhagen meeting next year, in 1 year of time, that the climate change is sliding down in the international policy agenda. So these are the three worries I wanted to share with you as a result of the financial crisis which could affect the energy sector and the climate change debate. In terms of our findings, just a couple of things. This is how we see the global energy picture for the next 20-25 years. And it is unsustainable. It is definitely unsustainable. And as I will show you, unsustainable in terms of the oil implications and in terms of implications on the climate change. One point I would like to highlight here is that we expect more than 1/3 of the growth in the global energy demand to come from coal. This is a point that I wanted to make because in many meetings like this, we sometimes forget the importance of coal in the global energy picture. In fact, the next slide, this here, it is not a forecast or anything. It is what happened in the last 7 years. This is data. What happened in the last 7 years is that the fuels that we discuss a lot, oil, gas, renewables, and nuclear, if you add all of them together, oil on top of that, if you put gas on top of that, renewables, and on top of that, nuclear, if you put all of them together, this is more or less what we got from coal in the last 7 years. So this is very important to note because this puts a big stamp for our future energy developments. We expect that the coal, especially in non-OECD countries, will play a major role in the electricity generation. It will be the backbone of the electricity generation in many years to come. We expect that more than 85% of the global coal demand will come from 2 countries only, China and India, 2 countries with high electricity demand growth rates. Let me go to oil. We see in the oil demand interesting future, if I may say so. We think that the OECD oil demand more or less peaked in 2005, 2006, the levels we have, it brings us a plateau, and it will be very difficult to see that there will be a higher growth of OECD as a total in the future. In 2030, we will be using in the OECD countries less oil than we are using today. And the bulk of the growth will come from China. More than 40% of the growth will come from China, mainly driven by the transportation sector. Today in the United States, 860 persons out of 1,000 persons own a car, and in China it is today 20 persons out of 1,000 persons own a car. So there is a big difference between China and the other countries, and with the increasing income levels, Chinese will buy cars. Middle East and India also add to the global oil demand growth. One of the findings of this study is that up to now we have considered Middle East as a key oil and gas producing region, and we have seen in this study that the Middle East emerges also as a key demand center, especially in terms of oil and gas, as a result of high population growth, high economic growth, and many other energy needs, such as desalination and the others. Of course, the strong subsidies they have on the oil and energy products in general provides that basis as well. So this picture shows you that the OECD countries are becoming less and less relevant in terms of oil demand growth. So we also looked at the supply side in depth. What we have done this year for the first time, we have analyzed 800 largest fields on a field-by-field basis in order to understand how would the future oil picture could look like. And these 800 fields make more than 3/4 of the global reserves, more than 2/3 of the global oil production, and we have covered all the supergiant fields, almost 90% of the giant fields, and most of the large fields. And we have seen that our existing fields are declining. And there's a decline in the existing fields, especially the mature fields. And we have came to the conclusion that the decline in the existing fields is a key problem. Normally, when we talk between friends, between colleagues, how much the oil production need to grow, how much we should increase the oil production, we think it should grow as much as the demand grows to match the demand growth. And this is wrong, or partly wrong. We have to increase the production first in order to compensate the decline in the existing fields, and then on top of that, to meet the growth in the demand. And the existing fields, as you see in the dark blue, are declining, and we think the decline can accelerate in the future, mainly because in the future we will get a lot of oil from smaller size fields and offshore fields, which have typically higher decline rates. If I can say in a much summarized version, today we produce worldwide or consume about 86 million barrels per day. If we were to assume that the global oil demand would be completely flat, 25 years, zero growth, 85, if we want to stay there, we need to increase the production by 45 million barrels per day, 45 million barrels per day new production, which would mean more or less 4 new Saudi Arabias, even if we were to stay in the we wouldn't increase the oil demand at all. If you want to increase the oil demand, if the oil demand goes, as we expected, about 20 million barrels per day, this would mean 65 million barrels per day, then we would need 6 Saudi Arabias in order to offset the decline and compensate and meet the growth in the demand. Now, can this be done? So when we look at the resource basis, we think that our total conventional, unconventional oil endowment is good enough to make this happen in theory. But I think the main problem is the following: whether or not the investments will come. We see in the next years to come a sea change in the oil industry structure. More than 80% of the growth in the oil production will need to come from national oil companies, mainly in Middle East, some of them in former Soviet Union, in Latin America and elsewhere. I don't want to say that national oil companies is better or worse than the international oil companies, but this is a new context. National oil companies have different tasks: building schools, building hospitals, building other infrastructure things. In the case of national oil companies, it is not the market conditions which gives them the invest or not to invest, or it is not the only market conditions. They have other plus preoccupations, mainly domestic preoccupations, which can give them the decisions to invest or not. So it will be a different context. The investment decision will be made based on different factors than what we have seen in the past. The dark blue in the previous picture you saw declining is most of them are in the control of the international oil companies, and they have difficulties to access the reserves which are under the control of the national oil companies. So therefore, if you put these two pictures together, the decline in the existing fields plus the change in the game, if I may say so, in the oil industry may have implications for our oil industry in the next years to come. So let me tell you a couple of things on the climate change and finish this brief presentation. The very first picture I showed you, that the oil fuels, oil, coal, gas, and so on, implies an increase in the temperature, which will bring us to up to 6 degrees Celsius increase in, compared to previous decades. And this is definitely unacceptable. Energy is responsible more than 2/3 of the global emissions. And when we look at the future, we see that the OECD emissions are more or less stable, and the bulk of the emissions will come from the non-OECD countries. Again, China, India, and Middle East play the key role there. And the good thing is that now everybody, almost everybody in the world, believes that we have to find a solution to climate change problem. This is the good thing. But the bad thing is we don't agree who is going to do what, who will share what part of the responsibility. This is the challenge that we are facing. Now, as International Energy Agency, you will see in our book, if we have time, we have proposed a post-Kyoto framework which looks at the cap and trade as the upcoming administration suggests as one of the key options. We look at the sectoral approaches, and we look at the voluntary policies and measures according to the country's affordability. And we have looked at two different trajectories. One of them is, as opposed to 6 degrees, a 3 degrees increase, which is about 550 ppm, as it's called, and the other one is a 2 degrees, which is 450 ppm, which is suggested by the EU leaders, G8 leaders, and recent statement, again made by the President-elect, to bring the US emissions in 2020 to 1990 level is under 450 ppm, in other words, 2 degrees temperature increase. What needs to be done to come there? So the red one is, again, 6 degrees increase. The blue one is a 3 degrees increase corresponds. And this green one is the 450, the famous 450 that everybody wants to come. But is it possible? Let me give you 2, 3 numbers, and I will leave it to you to decide if it is possible or not. In terms of the 450, the yellow part, energy efficiency, the most important one compared to all others, means that we have to increase the global energy efficiency each year. The improvement each year should be 2.4%. And just that you know, between 2000 and 2007, in the last 7 years, energy efficiency increased by 1% only. Second, in terms of renewables, in the year 2007, last year, we have, for example, wind installed capacity about 90 gigawatt, and 90 gigawatt we were able to come to 90 gigawatt as a result of huge efforts of the last 2 decades. In order to come to this 450 ppm level, we have to build worldwide each year 45 gigawatt. So we have to build each year half of what we have built in the last 2 decades in terms of wind capacity. In terms of nuclear power, we have to build each year to come to 450 about 20 nuclear power plants each year, and currently we are building 1.5. And carbon capture storage, I showed the coal picture, is very important to play a role. Otherwise, we have no chance to address the coal issue. My final slide is, for me, the most difficult part of the equation. Let me explain you what it is, and for me, the biggest challenge. This shows you three scenarios. We have the reference scenario with the current policies in place, and 550 and 450, and how much the CO2 emissions will be in the year 2030. For example, if you look at the green bar, in order to come to 450, global CO2 emissions in the year 2030 should be around 25 gigaton. Now, when you look at the first part, red and yellow, if the OECD countries' emissions tomorrow would be zero completely, we will still not be able to reach the 450. So in other words, if I'm not talking about the emission reductions, 20%, 15%, if the emissions, if the economy in the OECD countries tomorrow would completely be crashed, we are very close to that anyways, but if it was 25 years like that, no economic activity, no energy use, no CO2 emissions, we will still not be able to reach the 450 case. And the main problem here is that those countries, the non-OECD countries, do not put the climate change and anywhere up in their international policy agenda. So with these words, I finish here, and perhaps we can elaborate more in the discussion with Ed. Thank you very much.
You're going to go to the front. This meeting is going to be a little bit like a town meeting and a little bit like, obviously, a lecture with Q&A. But before we open it up, and I may, in fact, as we go through this, open it up in parts, ask a question on a series of topics that Fatih has touched upon, and then see whether there's follow-up in the group of people who are here to discuss the issue. The first question I have for you is, clearly, when you were initially writing this report, you probably had no expectation that the world economy was going to turn the way it turned after mid-July, when oil prices happened to peak. That being said, and now that we're in a kind of different environment, if there were 2, 3, or 4 bits of advice you would offer to President Obama coming out of this study, what might they be?
First of all, we have in September, when we finished the first draft of the book in end of July and went to holidays. When we came back from holidays in September, we saw the prices are collapsing. And we have, in our office at the IEA, we tried to reshape our assumptions in terms of economic growth and the price assumptions, and it, of course, changed a bit our results. Now, what I see that in some countries, some administrations put a lot of emphasis on, for example, oil supply security. They go, and another administration comes, they put a lot of emphasis on climate change but forgot the oil supply security. I think it will be very important that the upcoming the administration would understand that the oil supply and climate change can be addressed together. The policies I tried to highlight, the energy efficiency, renewables, nuclear, it would have both the oil supply issue as well as the climate change issue. The second part is on the climate change front. I really believe that the task is not only for the energy people or for the climate people to convince the major polluting countries to come on the table. There is a lot of role for the foreign diplomacy to make the major emitting countries understand that they should be part of that very solution of this very important challenge we are facing. A third issue, I think, what I would expect, United States has been always the leader of the changes, especially in the energy sector. I think to put more emphasis on the clean energy, carbon capture and storage, and also revival of nuclear, I would say, could give a very good impetus beyond United States. And finally, in terms of the transportation and the efficiency improvement in transportation, there is a big potential in the United States to definitely to make use of, and this will help a lot both for the United States and the global energy market. So these are some thoughts.
Well, each of these four suggestions is fairly rich in its set of implications. I'd like to look at one of them and thinking about lessons for President-elect Obama. We tend to think about lessons from the past, and I wonder in that context how relevant some of these lessons are. One of the things we've learned since the summer, although there were signs of it even before then, is that high prices can bring about a really radical change in demand projections. And we've seen in the U.S. Demand now falling 10% more or less below where it was a year ago, a not insignificant number since the 10% is a bigger number than the total demand growth that had been anticipated. Not thinking necessarily about lessons from the past, but in your own mind, are we on a new demand projection? Is the 1.6% energy demand growth for the future the right one? Is it going to be a lot lower than that? Is that going to make, if it's the case, these hard policy choices more difficult or easier to make?
I think I would say that globally, the oil demand each year, even in the economy rebounding and under normal economic conditions, would be around 1 million barrels per day, not more than that each year. So we shouldn't expect more than that, because the OECD part, as I tried to say, I wouldn't expect OECD part to make significant additions to that. It will come mainly from China, India, and Middle East and other developing countries. And at the same time, I also believe that the oil prices, in fact, this is a very wrong day to talk about this, because oil prices went down $5 today. But I believe personally that after the economy rebounds, we will have a higher oil price environment in the future, which would definitely give a slowing down effect to the oil demand growth. So therefore, the oil demand will be dampened in general, but not much growth in the OECD countries at all.
So we're going to see, on the good side, a lower demand trajectory, but on the bad side, a much tighter supply picture, which
Exactly.
could bring us back to prices where we were earlier this summer. I'm going to leave it at that for now.
Yeah.
I have a lot more questions to ask Fatih, but we're sort of the halfway point, and there were some hands up before, and I don't want to discourage questions and discussions from the audience. So wait until I call on you, and then when you're given a microphone, please state your name and affiliation. Yes.
Carter Bales, the Wicks Group. It seems to me that cap and trade, and particularly compromise cap and trade, is kind of a slow supply-side kind of blunt instrument approach, necessary but insufficient, and that you have to do three other things in order to tackle this problem. One is get comfortable with a whole new regulatory regime on energy efficiency, because it ain't going to happen otherwise. Two is serious deployment investment on the part of governments to get carbon capture and storage and other technologies to scale. And three, which you didn't mention, is addressing world forests, which are not only 20% of greenhouse gas abatement, but the after use of cut down forests is contributing another 10 to 12% through poor agricultural practices. So you're going to have to do things that modern economies don't like to do, including regulate and including really provide substantial support for technology development.
Should I? Okay. So first of all, cap and trade is a very important instrument. In Europe, we are organizing, or the Europeans are pushing it for some time. But if the cap and trade takes place between within the countries where the cost of mitigation is very similar to each other, because the European economies are so similar to each other that there are not big differences in terms of mitigation costs. If you want to have a major cap and trade system, you need to get the especially developing countries on board. Otherwise, it wouldn't make so much of a sense. And if we want to make larger reductions, we need cap and trade to be not only for Europe, but US and some major developing countries. And some developing countries are not at all ready to go ahead with the cap and trade. They don't want to even hear the name of the cap and trade. Why we need such systems is because of to give incentive to the energy investments. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen by itself. For carbon capture and storage, it is vital. And we believe for the OECD countries, carbon capture and storage is a litmus test if they are really serious about this issue of climate change. But it will not happen if there is no system, no financial incentive, because a Chinese, they can build a power plant, coal-fired power plant, or they can build a coal-fired power plant with carbon capture and storage. The cost is 1 to 4. Why should they go to the most expensive one if there is no incentive for them? So in order to establish a carbon capture storage as a mature technology, in order to push that, we need a global framework. And this global framework can happen, hopefully, in Copenhagen. If it doesn't happen, we need huge efforts from the OECD countries to subsidize the carbon capture and storage in the major developing countries. I'll show the cold picture. And I am not sure that many OECD countries will be willing to do that. The best is to have a global climate framework, hopefully in Copenhagen, to follow the Kyoto Agreement.
Any follow-up on climate change?
Trevor Hauser, RHG. Good to see you, Fatih. I wonder if we're in the U.S. considering a massive fiscal stimulus package for early January, and there's undoubtedly going to be some energy and environmental spending as a part of that. Given your view of the energy landscape and the types of technologies we're going to need to get to a 450 scenario, what would you see as kind of priority areas for priming the pump with fiscal stimulus that would ease the way to a cap-and-trade system down the road?
I would say, first of all, most of the projects, most of the policies I highlighted in the 450 are not necessarily so expensive. There are difficulties to make them move, but they are not so expensive. Just to give you a very big number, in order to make the 450 happen, and we look at only the energy sector, the gentleman before us, forestry, I know only the energy sector, and I speak only on the energy-related CO2 emissions. You are right, there are some other factors that I am not well informed about. I am talking on the energy sector only. In order to reach the 450, the additional investments we have to make compared to our reference scenario, business as usual scenario, the additional investments, more efficiency, more renewables, more nuclear, and more CCS would mean each year we make energy investments which is equal to 0.6% of the global GDP annually. So 0.6% of the GDP. So is it high or not? It is up to one person to decide, but it is something like if you have $100 in your pocket, do you want to give 60 cents for climate change or not? This is a question. But in the case of the United States, I would say the very easy part to go is the efficiency. The second is efficiency, and the third one is efficiency. So efficiency is the first part, especially in the transportation sector. Transportation is the most important one, both for the climate change and for the oil security. The fourth one, I would say, is the electricity generation. In the electricity generation, there will be lots of retirements, coal-fired power plants, in the next 10 to 15 years of time in the United States because of their economic lifetime will be over, and there's a lot of room to mix the cards and to make it carbon-free, such as nuclear power or renewables in that respect. And the third or the fifth area in that respect, I would say, is push the carbon capture and storage. And United States leadership in that area would be a very good example for the rest of the world.
As long as, Trevor, you would ask that question, I wondered if you could comment on Fatih's pessimism with respect to China and other emerging market countries' willingness to adhere to tighter carbon emissions guidelines?
I suppose I can take a crack at that. I guess that I think that China, it's a little bit. I'm a little bit more optimistic about China than I am about India, and that's because the source of China's emissions today are from a part of the sector, part of the economy that China's looking to constrain anyway. And I think that you could see a kind of rebalancing of Chinese economic growth that Beijing's trying to engineer that would be useful for an energy and environmental standpoint. Now, the key is how can you take a number of things that the government's already trying to do and shape them into a commitment in the international arena when China has no incentive on its own to differentiate itself from the other 168 countries that are listed as non-Annex 1 in climate negotiations. And I think they're engaging through smaller groupings of countries outside of the UNFCCC offers some more alternatives. But I mean, if we look just at the past couple months, and Fatih, you'd know this better than anyone, in China in August and October, September, electricity demand is down year on year from 2007. And that's not because the economy has completely hit the wall, though it's slowed significantly. It's that a handful of energy-intensive industries are constraining in the face of a slowdown in the property market. There's an opportunity now for Beijing to capitalize on that and lock in that trend and put China on a more balanced growth trajectory going forward. And I think that could pay some pretty significant dividends. I mean, just the reduction in steel production that we've seen this year has cut a France-sized hole out of China's CO2 emissions bill. And that's just a short-term correction in the property market. So I guess I'm more optimistic over the medium term.
Do you have any comment?
No, I would say I am more realistic in terms of China because Trevor is one of the person who knows China the best. But I think China will take this as a political issue, and China will barely move if they do not see that it wouldn't. I mean, if they see that it will harm their economy, I don't think that they will move. They will give the bulk of the burden to be taken by the OECD governments, and if the OECD governments move, then they will move. In 2015, the top 3 emitters are number 1 China, number 2 US, and number 3 India, and they make about 55% of the global CO2 emissions. Why China would move if they do not see that there is a major move from the United States? I don't see. But as Trevor said, many measures China can take to curb CO2 emissions would help improving energy efficiency, good for the oil import bills, good for the local pollution, and good for their economy as well. There's a lot of co-benefits there. But they will not move themselves alone if the others don't move, especially the United States.
We can move beyond climate change and carbon capture to other subjects to the degree there are questions. Yes.
Fatih, thank you for presentation. Isuru from Equinox. Question on the decline curves. Obviously, the report came out with shocking numbers. How does that change going forward? You mentioned for this year what the declines are, but can you give us a sense of what the curve is if you look at the fields that are currently in production going forward?
I think in fact, when we to look at the decline rate issue was a very important issue, and I am still surprised that the people did not take the decline rate issue as a key issue in the oil industry. We have so much discussions whether or not oil demand will go 1%, 1.1, or 0.9. When you look at the investments, decline rates are so much more important than the demand growth in terms of the investment requirements. But the problem is, for the decline rates, you don't have good data worldwide. So we were able to put, to our knowledge, the best publicly available data set. We thank the IHS colleagues and the others here very, very much. And it would be, I would say, or it is very misleading to say that, I mean, for example, in our study, we found the post-peak decline rate, when the oil fields go up, come to a peak and start to decline, the post-peak decline rate globally is about 6.4%. So this is a bit, it's an indicative number, but it is a bit misleading because it changed so much from the Middle East to North Sea, from North Sea to other countries, from onshore to offshore, depending on the type of rock. And we try to give a sense to understand how the decline rate will move in the future. And what we see is that in the future, decline rate will accelerate, and this is the observed decline rate, namely, it declines despite you make the investments. So this is I'm going too much technical, I know, it will be upset at me, but this is the oil field can decline, and when you make investments, you can slow down the decline. We call it observed decline rate. This is 6.4 I mentioned, and there's a natural decline rate without investment. So the number I gave it, the observed decline rate, and even the observed decline rate will accelerate in the future because we will get the more and more oil from onshore fields which are smaller size, and we will get a lot of offshore fields. And smaller size onshore fields and the offshore fields have typically higher decline rates to what we get bulk of the oil today from the supergiant fields, which have typically lower decline rates. So the decline rate will accelerate in the future because of the supply base will change in favor of offshore and smaller size fields.
Any follow-up on this question? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Ben Turk with Row Capital. You'll forgive my naivete. I'm a struggling venture capitalist, but I thought it was fascinating, the forecast for the depletion, which is obviously a hard art and some science. I was most interested in if you could give us a little bit of color on the undiscovered deposits and how one can follow that forecast, because you did make a pretty extreme forecast that oil prices would be much higher in the future, and obviously that all ties together. So hopefully you could give us a little bit more color and elaborate on it. That would be much appreciated.
The oil, we have if you have a chance to look at our book, we have a very nice chart, shows the different resource base and how much we need to produce that oil. Today, according to our numbers, about in order to produce the marginal barrel, we need about $80 today. This is the level of price we would need. And in the future, we expect it will be more and more difficult and more complex to get the oil under the ground and to bring to the market. Therefore, our expectation is the price assumption we have, and it is the reason I dare to say that we think the oil price around $100 would be a good level of price to induce enough level of investments. But of course, we know that in Middle East, for example, some key Middle East producers, to produce 1 barrel of oil, you need much lower level of prices. But we know that the marginal barrel has to make the prices, and therefore our estimation is today about $80, and it will slightly increase in the future. So therefore, we need a price level about $100 in real terms, to be honest with you, to make the necessary investments. And I can tell you one more, in fact, one more pessimistic thing than that, if you wish so. So if I mention that if the postponed investments today, or especially in 2009, most of the investments of this year has been already booked and they are going forward. But in 2009, if there are really so many investments postponed, projects postponed, we may well see prices when the demand and the economy picks up, which are higher than the number I mentioned now.
Fatih, I don't want to take issue with you on the issue of project postponement, but as you know, I stand behind no one in applauding the effort you've made to make far more transparent than anyone has ever done anywhere the issue of decline rates. On the other hand, as you also know, I was critical of it in two particular respects, and I'd love to hear your counter to the two criticisms that I've offered. One is that history tells us that there are periods of time when cost escalation is something to take into account, and there are periods in time when costs go down. And that happens when the scarcity of resources, people, equipment, drilling equipment, steel, is overcome by investments. We've now seen in the last year, and it started well before the peaking of oil prices, the price of steel going down, particularly if you do a currency-adjusted evaluation of steel. That critical element has come off significantly by 30 or 40%. We're seeing an incredible deployment of capital to build drilling vessels that are capable of finding and developing oil offshore, and they may be in fields that have steep decline rates, or it may not be, because we don't have any history of developing very, very large supergiant fields offshore. But the numbers are sort of compelling. The world had 17 deep water vessels in 2000, 10 were built between 2000 and 2007, and 135 are being built over the next 4 years. And some of them may be in surplus, at which point drilling rates are going to plummet. So, you know, how convinced are you on the assumption, not on the decline rates, but on the costs of finding and developing, that we're not going to see phenomenal efficiency gains? And how confident can you be that with this surge of capacity to find and develop, we won't have a couple of 2Ps or maybe 5, 6, or 7 that will kind of reverse the decline numbers that are embedded in your study?
In fact, the cost curves, when we look at the cost curves, we have not, unlike many other similar studies, we have not assumed that in real terms cost will increase. We took it as more or less a flat in terms of the material cost, in terms of the other things. But what is going to happen, I believe, is that it will be much more difficult to get the oil, to get from much more complex areas, especially the non-OPEC oil. The more complicated it will be, the much more sophisticated technology we will need, and the much more sophisticated technology we will need, the higher the cost will be. It is not only the steel cost. You are right, steel cost may come and up and down, but the technology we will need in the future in order to bring that this rather challenging technological fields, especially in the offshore, and some of them in onshore, would need higher costs, and therefore it is the reason $100 we think is a fair price to induce investment. Of course, as IEA, we would like to see lower price levels, but this is what the investments, we need to induce investments, and therefore there may be need a price level that way.
There's a mic over here.
Thank you. Sally Odlin, Columbia University and Association for Study of Peak Oil. This WEO 2008 represents a radical departure from 3 decades of previous reports and a high level of optimism about supply and basically demand-based projections that supply would rise to meet whatever calculated demand, mainly through a call on OPEC. What accounts for this sea change in your approach to suddenly go to a bottoms-up field-by-field analysis, for which we truly commend you? This is an amazing body of work. And in the end, there's still an assumption that there will be an implicit assumption that there will be a call on OPEC to meet the projected demand. Why this change in the optimism of the reporting? And do you personally feel that it's remotely possible to keep supply even in the current economic and geopolitical environment over the next 5 years?
Okay. So first of all, why this change happened? In fact, there are 3-4 major institutions who make these long-term projections, such as our colleagues from the Department of Energy, the Energy Information Administration, I should say, and our colleagues from the OPEC Secretariat, European Commission, and ourselves. Up to now, we all made the projections so that you have a global oil demand, and then you look at the non-OPEC supply, and the rest will be met by OPEC. And this year, for the first time, we were very eager to do this study. I mean, since a couple of years, but we didn't have the chance to bring the data together. We wanted to go field by field to see how realistic it is that this gap will be met by our assumptions. And Therefore, it is the reason we look at OPEC and non-OPEC countries, and as a result of that, we see higher prices, and our oil demand this year is, or in other words, oil supply is about 10 million barrels per day lower than what we have set last year, mainly as a result of high oil prices. So whether or not this oil production, the OPEC will increase the production, I really don't know. I really don't know. What I say, if you read our study, if you make a word search, there are two words come out. One is oil, the other one is if. So there are a lot of ifs there in the if the investments are made. We say that if the investments are made, they can do it, but whether or not they will make the investments, whether or not they will see that it is in line with their interest, we put the alarm bells around the book and around the numbers enough to make the politicians or decision maker to be aware of the pitfalls that we have in the oil supply in the next years to come.
Fatih, go ahead. Mike, over here, please.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Drebin with TVL Capital. I've listened very attentively to your information, and it's extremely useful, the level of detail you've gone into to analyze the oil situation. I'm just wondering, within the structure of your studies, how deeply have you looked at technological innovation going on in the field of alternative energy as a potential solution to all this? And again, somebody mentioned President-elect Obama's future programs. And would you say that a Marshall Plan for alternative energy is an absolute necessity based on your projections of being somewhat pessimistic in the oil equation? Thank you.
Now, with the alternative energy, in fact, what we said in the beginning of our book is that if, as it stands now with the current energy policies, we are going to hit a wall, both in terms of oil security, and the second one is climate change. And we can only change this if there is if we can make we call it energy revolution. So it is a very strong word, energy revolution, but even the IEA became revolutionary nowadays. So this is but can we do the energy revolution? Yes, we can do, depending on how we describe the word revolution. There are some technologies, first of all, which are currently available, and we are not making the most out of that. This is the first thing, and especially on the efficiency side, there is a lot of room for that. And again, I am sorry to again come back to that, but the nuclear energy is a very important option. We can make much more use of that. And thirdly, the renewable energies, especially wind, in good sites make a lot of sense. But in addition to that, what we expect from the upcoming administration is pushing the carbon capture and storage. This is a very important technology, and if you put the carbon capture and storage, and we need carbon capture and storage not for the United States only or mainly, we need it for China, for India, because the coal use is coming from those countries. And if the United States take the lead and push the carbon capture and storage technology, brings the cost down, and we have a few technological problems, fix those problems, I think it will be very, very commendable. So if there is a revolution, it will, I will say this time it will not start in Paris like the French Revolution, but it will start in Washington. So because the United States will give the signal to the rest of the world, and there is no other powerful economy which could give such a signal, and the vibrations of the signal will be felt in terms of the market signals throughout the world. So therefore, there is the responsibility on the upcoming administration on the energy sector is not limited to for the United States, I should say.
Fatih, one of the remarkable things about the WEO is that you've led a group of people. You touch upon hydrocarbons, you touch upon alternatives, you touch upon technology, you touch upon the transportation sector, the residential sector, the commercial sector, the industrial sector, the power sector. And you wisely at one point said, you don't know much about agriculture, so you won't answer the question. But there are so many ramifications to energy and its centrality to security and to economic growth. Bearing in mind what you know and what you don't know, is there anything now that the study is over that you would have done differently had you to start over again?
In fact, as it stands now, to be honest with you, no. I am very happy. I'm very happy with this study. I am overly happy. Just myself was overwhelmed with the interest because this book repositions the IEA a bit in the oil supply debate, and I was a bit amazed that I was not too much attacked. So I'm very happy with that. So therefore, it means we are doing as much as we can a job which is within our limited budget. Not a bad work. But what happened is that I mentioned these 4 studies. Our colleagues from the US, OPEC, and the Commission, we were more or less the same direction. We left those other books, other projections with this book. So I said I am happy now, but it remains to be seen what I will hear in the next days to come. But for the time being, I wouldn't change much in this study.
Well, I had meant that to be a last question with a long-winded answer. You were short, so there's another question.
Yeah. Stan Higginbotham. I wondered if you might comment on the global commercial vessels. My sense is that the shipping world vessels burn the most inefficient and polluting of fuels, and it's an area in which the problems of control are most severe. Is this a significant problem, or if it is, are there things you're working on to deal with it?
In fact, in one of the charts I show where the carbon dioxide emissions will come from, I said in the bottom it says 97% of the growth will come outside of the OECD countries. In fact, 3% are coming from international marine bunkers. They have a significant share in the carbon dioxide emissions. And there are 2, in fact, I'm sure there are colleagues here who knows the climate change negotiations much better than me. There are 2 very controversial subjects. International marine bunkers, who is going to deal with them, which country and in which context. The second one is in China. China, or similar countries like China, some countries make a lot of manufactured goods and to export. And during their process, they are using a lot of energy and emitting a lot of CO2 emissions, but these goods are exported. So if in the case of China, about 1/3 of the emissions of China are so-called embedded CO2 emissions, embedded carbon dioxide emissions, which are due to exported to the Western countries. So who is going to be responsible for that? This is another topic, in addition to international marine bunkers, which is controversial in the international climate change debate.
Well, Fatih, it's a council tradition to end meetings on time. We're eternally grateful for you to having come here again to share with us a remarkable report. And I think we're all grateful for the IEA to keep you in the position you're in to do this kind of pioneering work. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching this Council on Foreign Relations video. For additional audio, video, and transcripts of CFR meetings, as well as expert analysis of international news, please visit us online at cfr.org.